I want to quickly start this video by highlighting some of the defensive lapses and mistakes by Lucas Vázquez. In this sequence, you can see Lucas Vázquez completely loses Rafinha. Now, in the second sequence, what you can see is that Vázquez has no awareness of where Rafinha is. And that could have been a goal as well. Absolutely not tracking the runner into the box. Look at how poor defensively this is. Now, let's look at this third opportunity. This is the difference between Koundé and Lucas Vázquez when you have a reliable fullback. And to me, one of the stories of this game is the gulf in quality from Koundé to Lucas Vázquez. Look at the ball that Koundé plays here, which led to Barcelona's first goal. Now, look at this as well. First of all, there's nobody pressing Koundé here, but look at the quality that Koundé has, that he plays his ball, which ultimately led to another goal. So one of the themes of this game could be Koundé versus Lucas Vázquez and the difference in quality. So yes, Carlo Ancelotti had a bad game plan, but you could not compare the quality of these fullbacks against one another. According to Relevo, some of the Real Madrid players are not happy with the way Carlo Ancelotti is, quote, soft with some players and hard on others. When Real Madrid is in crisis, we get a lot more information behind the scenes. So far this season, Real Madrid has played 29 games. And of those 29 games, 6 of them have been defeats. That means that Real Madrid has lost 20% of their games. That is 1 in 5 games. 1 out of every 5. Versus last season when Real Madrid, we had 1 defeat and it was against Atletico Madrid. But in this video, I want to talk about the astronomical descent of Real Madrid. How we went from doing a double last season and now this season we're in some serious crisis mode. When you look at how we've played this season, you can see some structural issues. After the defeat to Lille, Liverpool, AC Milan, Barcelona. And when you consider that last season we had 3 ACL injuries. Thibaut Courtois obviously was out, Militao, and David Alaba. Those are 3 key players that started for us in the Champions League final. And not to mention we lost Karim Benzema. If you remember, everybody was talking about signing Harry Kane. But it was Jude Bellingham coming up with the late winners time and time again. He was doing something that he has no right doing. No other midfielder in the world was doing what Jude was doing in the beginning of last season. He was straight up saving us and bailing us out. And that covered through a lot of the cracks. But the other thing is, last season we relied so heavily on both Ferland Mendy and Dani Carvajal, who both had arguably their best seasons at Real Madrid. Both of them did. And that was so important. So to go from Dani Carvajal and Mendy of last season to Mendy of this season, Lucas Vázquez, that is a drastic drop from last season. I'm going to be talking about a few things in this video. I'm going to try to be as objective and honest as possible. When you look at the starting lineup that we put out against Barcelona in the Clásico and the Supercopa, Lucas Vázquez and Tchouaméni, those options alone should show you that clearly Lucas Vázquez doesn't have what it takes to compete with some of the elite wingers in Europe. And teams and opposition feel very confident when they face Real Madrid and they play on the left wing because they know they have to go up against somebody who's a makeshift defender. So you have this belief in yourself that you know you're going against somebody who's not very good defensively. And that just fills you up with confidence. The other player we have to talk about is Tchouaméni. Now let's be fair and be honest about Tchouaméni. When he joined Real Madrid, all of the stats, everything in terms of metrics looked like he was a generational player. And the idea was, in terms of passes completed and aerial duels won, he was scoring in the 90 plus percentile in comparison to his peer group. And if you remember when we had the days of Toni Kroos, Luka Modric, and Casemiro, in possession, one of the things we did was we pushed Casemiro high up the pitch. And of course, in the days of Zidane, sometimes Casemiro would even crash the box and he wasn't responsible for the ball progression. Toni Kroos and Luka Modric would drop into deeper positions and they would be the ones initiating all the build-up play. But the idea with Tchouaméni is you could finally integrate somebody into that midfield who's more press resistant and more reliable in leading the ball progression from the back. But what we've seen from Tchouaméni, and the sample size is big enough now to say that he doesn't make sense as neither a center back or as a 6. But Tchouaméni as an 8, playing in the pivot, he can play that role well. But if you're relying on Tchouaméni to provide a lot of the defensive work, you're going to be disappointed. He has lapses in concentration. And frankly, he's not the most elite 6 in the world. So for 80 million, you have to say that Tchouaméni has not panned out the way we were hoping he was going to pan out. But if there's any bright spot about Tchouaméni is that he's still young. When you see Tchouaméni play for France, he's a much better player than the player that plays for Real Madrid. because the role is much different for France. But the role that Carlo Ancelotti is asking Tchouaméni to play, that's not the right role for Tchouaméni. Just this season, game against AC Milan, there was a header that he lost in the box. One of the main reasons he's on the team is to win those headers. A few minutes later, Tchouaméni gifts the ball to them. Morata goes to the other side and scores a goal. It's pure lapses in concentration. And Lucas Vázquez, now if you look at teams like, let's say, Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp, you can say that Trent Alexander-Arnold is not the best defensive right back in the world. But when you pin your opponent into their half and you have more control over the ball, then players like that make all the sense in the world. Lucas Vázquez is not a bad player. I would keep Lucas Vázquez at Real Madrid as a squad player. But if you're asking Lucas Vázquez to be your starting right back and then he's getting cooked by Rafinha who's on fire, then why are you blaming Lucas Vázquez for that? And by the way, why is nobody pressuring Koundé when he's putting that ball behind our entire defensive line? And if you look at the separation between our midfielders and defenders, we talk about compact, that is not compact whatsoever. And Carlo Ancelotti at the Etihad had at least a solid strategy in that game. He went with 5 in the back. In this game in the Clásico, we went with 4 in the back, and Barcelona exploited that extra space. And during the game when Real Madrid was not playing well, and it was clear that Barcelona was absolutely dominating the game, Carlo Ancelotti was very late to make changes. It was clear that Real Madrid needed more help in the midfield. I talked about in the preview video how important it was for Real Madrid to have more control in midfield, because ultimately that's what was going to win you the game. But the Barcelona players wanted it more. You even saw some of the Barca players like Lewandowski throwing himself at crosses. I didn't see that same hunger from the Real Madrid players. And that's why when you have homegrown talent like the likes of Gavi, the likes of these other players, Lamine Yamal, it means so much more for them to play these kinds of games. And that's why you need potentially players like Raúl Asensio. I don't know, is Forterra a better option, the player from Castilla, over Lucas Vázquez? We'll never know under Carlo Ancelotti. But overall, it was the lack of adjustments, the body language of the players, and the fact that it seems like Carlo Ancelotti has literally run out of ideas, and he's taken this team as far as he can. A story that highlights this very fact was when we played against Manchester City in the Champions League 3 years ago. If you guys remember that masterclass that Rudiger put against Erling Haaland at the Bernabeu when the game ended 1-1, when Vinícius scored that ridiculous goal from outside the box. Rudiger defended Haaland spectacularly that night. But in the return leg where we got destroyed at the Etihad, he started Eder Militao over Rudiger because Militao was suspended for that first leg. And that should tell you everything you need to know about Carlo Ancelotti. If you perform well, it doesn't matter. What matters is the players that he trusts. And he has one way of looking at the game. And that's why his style and the way that Carlo plays football, it worked for a little while, and we thank him for it. But this should definitely be the last year. And Real Madrid has made it clear that if Carlo was to get sacked, Solari would come in as the manager. Is that really the worst thing? To salvage the rest of the season, to bring in Solari, somebody with new, fresh ideas, who is going to give the younger players, the Castilla players, more trust, more opportunities? If you remember when Solari was the manager, he was one of the first people to tell Vinícius that he had his full support and trust. It was Solari who believed in Vinícius. Who knows? Maybe there's players in the Castilla who are going to put up more of a fight, who might be solutions for the long term. But we would have never discovered Asensio if it wasn't for all of these ACL injuries. And we won't discover anybody else as long as Carlo Ancelotti is in charge. The winter transfer window is open right now, and Real Madrid, I understand, are trying to get Alexander-Arnold. But the board cannot be this arrogant that they think they can ride out the whole season with this current squad. Because if you do not bring anybody in this winter transfer window, you have given up and you've basically bent the knee. That's what you're doing. You not bringing anybody in this winter transfer window is you bending the knee and saying, we'll just try to do well next season. And the reason why I think the club should take more immediate action and look to let Carlo Ancelotti go is also because of the lack of rotation. To me, not only was Real Madrid outclassed from a managerial perspective, but it's so clear that Jude Bellingham, Federico Valverde, Camavinga, these guys were exhausted. You could see how tired they were. Do they play better if they're rested and they're fresh and they're not playing every 3 days and traveling to Saudi and having to deal? This was the 4th away game for Real Madrid since the winter ended. We had to travel to Valencia. We had to have all these travel. We traveled to Valencia. We had the Copa del Rey game away. Then an 8-hour flight to Saudi Arabia, play Mallorca. 3 days later, we play the Super Cup final, also in Saudi Arabia. The players are dead. and they're not getting rotation, that they're not getting any kind of rest. So are we really surprised that they didn't play their best? How about when Vinícius is putting up a disaster class and you don't take him off? That Rodrigo change for Vinícius should have happened way earlier. The guy was playing abysmally. Carlo Ancelotti's ideas are done at this club. They're not working anymore. The truth is that Real Madrid is still in a position where they can win titles this season. We're 1 point behind Atletico Madrid. They still have to come to the Bernabeu. We have the big game against Salzburg in the Champions League. There's so much more for the season. It's salvageable. We could still do the treble. We still do the quadruple this season. But the only way this club is going to really maximize on this season is bringing in somebody new with fresh ideas. And I'll just end it by talking about who I think is the long-term solution for Real Madrid. Now, based on everything that I've seen and the research that I've done and on the different coaches and options that are out there, realistically, there's really 4 options. There's really 3 options, I should say, out there. There's Zidane to come back, but the big thing is Deschamps now retiring at the end of 2026. And I'm sure he's in position where he wants to go in for that job. But of course, if Real Madrid calls Zizou, I'm sure he'll come back. The other option is Raúl, who's been coaching Castilla and waiting. He's been sitting there waiting. But from everything I understand, the club is not so keen on bringing in Raúl. It's likely he'll move on to potentially a Bundesliga team next season and coach somewhere else. And there's Xabi Alonso, obviously, who the club really likes. And let me tell you who I personally would really love more than anybody to come in and coach this Real Madrid team, but I don't think it's realistic. And that's Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp has said himself that at one point in his life, he would like to coach in Spain. That's something that he said. But we know that Jurgen Klopp is not the kind of manager who comes in and manages a big club that already has all the money. He'd rather a more blue-collar team with a bunch of players that are willing to fight and work and press. But if there's anybody who can maximize the ROI on these players, it's him. And if there's anybody who can institute a system with these players, it's Jurgen Klopp. And trust me, even if we're losing Clásicos with Jurgen Klopp, we're not getting destroyed like this with Jurgen Klopp. It's just not happening. But to me, the Xabi Alonso appointment is a little bit more risky. That's my only concern. And if you look at Xabi Alonso, the way he's managed Bayer Leverkusen, he really likes to use a lot of the same philosophies that Carlo Ancelotti uses. He adapts his team quite frequently. He relies on individual players and maximizes the potential of those players. He tends to play 3 in the back, but that he doesn't always do that. Sometimes he does go to a back 4. But Xabi Alonso is not really a system manager, and Xabi Alonso is not really about pressing high up the pitch either. In many games, he sometimes will sit in a mid block or a deep block, and he relies on his players running a lot. But my concern with Xabi Alonso is, if there is a crisis or there's a bad string of games where he's not doing so well, he doesn't have the credit in the bank that a lot of these established managers do. And when we know at Real Madrid to succeed, sometimes it's about getting the media off your back. It's about getting the fans off your back. But Xabi Alonso doesn't have that track record yet. But when Carlo Ancelotti loses a couple of really bad games, he gets to retain his job because of who he is. It's because of all the things he's done in his career. And end of the day, the board still believes that Carlo Ancelotti, come end of the season, could potentially pull another Champions League out of the hat or pull another deep run into the Champions League and a La Liga title out of the hat. But we just signed one of the best players of a generation, Kylian Mbappe, who was on fire yesterday. And Real Madrid is doing well financially. From everything that I understand, Real Madrid, from a financial point of view, is doing pretty well as a club. Why not spend a little bit of that money and bring in reinforcements? Try to bring in Alphonso Davies. Try to bring in Trent Alexander-Arnold. Trent is now down to the last few months of his contract. Would Liverpool entertain a $40 million offer, a $30 million offer, something like that? But it's time really for Real Madrid to bid Carlo Ancelotti farewell. I hope the board at Real Madrid stops being so arrogant and they stop thinking that they can keep having success relying on players like Lucas Vázquez, Dani Ceballos, Tchouaméni at center back. Anyways, that's all I got for this one. Let me know if you guys agree in the comments with my take. Maybe you guys might disagree with some of the things that I said. Let me know. Thank you for watching. Hala Madrid.